You know, when you think of Nintendo, you probably think of fun, right? Mario, Zelda, some of the most iconic characters, period. But behind that friendly face is this incredible story of pure business genius, ruthless control, and the careful brick-by-brick construction of a digital empire. And today, we're going to look at the blueprints of that empire.
So how in the world did this happen? How did the Nintendo Entertainment System, just a simple gray box, not only take over the entire globe, but literally bring an industry back from the dead? Well, the answer isn't just about having great games. It's about a master plan for total control.
And to really get it, we're going to think of Nintendo's strategy like a fortress. First, we'll see how they built it with a hardware lock and key. Then, how they ruled the kingdom of cartridges inside those walls. We'll look at their legal playbook for defending it. And finally, we'll ask the big question: was this whole thing a monopoly or an absolute masterpiece?
Okay, so let's start with part one, Nintendo's digital fortress and the very foundation of their empire. Because to understand why Nintendo built such high, impenetrable walls, you have to see the absolute mess that came before it. Before Nintendo came along, the video game world was basically the Wild West. You had companies like Atari that had zero control over who made games for their consoles. And what happened? The market got flooded with just awful, broken, glitchy games. It was a disaster. By 1983, the entire industry just collapsed. Stores wouldn't even stock video games. Parents felt ripped off. It was out of that total chaos that Nintendo saw a huge opportunity. So, with the entire industry basically in smoking ruins, Nintendo saw its chance to rebuild it their way. And that brings us to Section 2, the hardware lock and key. This is literally how they started building the walls of their fortress, making damn sure the chaos of the Atari years could never happen on their turf.
The blueprint they used is a concept we now call a walled garden. I mean, think about Apple's App Store today. It's the same idea. It's a completely closed system where one company makes all the rules. Nintendo basically pioneered this for home entertainment, and they did it with this brilliant mix of hardware and some seriously smart marketing.
Now here's the genius part. It was a three-step process to build that wall. First, they used proprietary hardware, consoles and cartridges that only they made. Second, and this was their secret weapon, was the 10NES lockout chip. It was basically a lock and key system. If your game cartridge didn't have the official Nintendo key, the console wouldn't unlock and play it. And third, they marketed this control as a benefit to you, the player, with the official seal of quality. It was a promise that any game with that seal on it would actually, work. And get this, if you ever owned an NES, you were a part of this system. Remember blowing on the cartridge to get it to work? Well, what you were actually doing was trying to clear the connection to that very 10NES security chip. That little ritual we all did was a direct interaction with the cornerstone of Nintendo's entire empire. Wild, right? All right, so the walls are up. The fortress is secure. But that's nothing if you can't control the kingdom inside. So that brings us to part 3, Kings of the Cartridge. This is where we see how Nintendo's control over the actual games became completely and totally absolute. I mean, just look at this. It's a tale of two totally different worlds. Over on the right, you've got the PC market, total freedom. But on the left, inside Nintendo's fortress, whoa, it was a different story. If you were a developer and wanted to make a game for the NES, you had to play by their rules. Nintendo told you how many cartridges you could make. They limited you to just a few games a year. They controlled everything. And this control made them so much money. Nintendo often took a staggering 30% cut of all revenue from game developers, and that was on top of forcing them to buy the expensive custom cartridges directly from Nintendo. It was a crazy steep price to pay, but developers didn't really have a choice. And you might be asking why. Well, because Nintendo had the crown jewels. Their own games, Mario, Zelda, Metroid, were so good, so popular, that the NES was the only place you wanted to be. They created this massive audience, and if other game developers wanted to sell to those millions of players, they had no choice but to enter the fortress and, well, pay the king's taxes. Of course, any good fortress has a moat to keep attackers out. And for Nintendo, that moat was their legal playbook, which was defended by a team of very, very aggressive lawyers. And I mean it, they defended every single inch of their empire. When Universal Studios came knocking, saying Donkey Kong was a ripoff of King Kong, Nintendo fought back and won big. When Atari got clever and tried to bypass their 10NES security chip, Nintendo sued them into the ground. They even went after Blockbuster for photocopying game manuals. The message could not have been clearer. Do not mess with the fortress. This quote here from Howard Lincoln, who was the chairman of Nintendo of America, just says it all. This wasn't just business as usual for them. It was a declaration of war. They saw their system of control as an investment, and they were ready to use every legal weapon they had to protect it.
So all of this brings us to our final section, and really the big question at the heart of it all. Was this fortress Nintendo built a monopoly, or was it a masterpiece? What's the real legacy here?
On one hand, the case for masterpiece is really strong. I mean, they saved an entire industry. They rebuilt trust with that seal of quality, and they created a stable environment where some of the greatest games ever were made. But the case for monopoly is just as compelling. You could argue their tactics crushed creativity, kept game prices artificially high, limited consumer choice, and were, without a doubt, anti-competitive. The crazy part is, both of these views are kind of true.
And that brings us right to today. Just think about the world we live in now. Apple's App Store, the PlayStation Store, the Xbox Marketplace. What are they? They're all walled gardens. They all operate on the exact same principles Nintendo laid down decades ago with that little gray box. So the real question isn't just about Nintendo's past. It's about our digital life right now. Was Nintendo just a one-off, or did they actually write the playbook that we're all still living by today?